No, member for Bass.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise this evening to give my contribution on the estimate scrutiny for the Minister of the Environment, Minister amongst a number of other things, and wanted to make my contribution on reading the Hansard from that output around a number of matters that coexist across my portfolio of primary industries and water. I know that both the Minister and myself have stood up to speak in this place around the Meagean skate in Macquarie Harbour, and I just wanted to put on record some comments and reflection on that and the exchanges that occurred in that committee. One of the things that I wanted to reflect on is that often in this place, and particularly in estimates, that opportunity to ask questions with the intention of getting an answer to be informed or getting an answer to find out a response to a matter versus asking a question to try and recharacterise an issue. And I think often questions and exchanges can oversimplify or seek to be very simplistic about an issue which is actually quite complex. There's no doubt that the matters pertaining to the Meagean skate are very complex, and when they are deconstructed down to single-focused decisions or actions, it's not actually giving respect and regard to the full complexity and understanding and to the full life and history of that animal in and of itself. And so we have heard through estimates, and we've heard in this chamber, radical calls for action to occur in response to the concerns around all salmon farms should be taken out of the harbour. And there is no evidence that indicates that actually... There is no evidence indicates that action by and of itself would make an impact. And so what it actually is using an animal that is under pressure as a political tool to raise an issue which is not fair and has reputational damage to an industry that contributes so much to Tasmania. Having done some research to develop a better understanding about the challenges for the Meagean skate and understanding that in the environment that it continues to exist, there are a number of inputs that collectively change the seascape or the environment that it exists within. And that everyone agrees, other than those sort of single-focused, radical sort of positions, that the future needs to be considered in an integrated way. I was reading a recent article published, and I just wanted to put on the record some of these comments to give balance to the exchanges that have occurred over recent times, and to lead off by saying that, industry peak bodies like Salmon Tasmania, they love the environments that they operate in as industries, as employees, as people, as families, as communities. They want to do whatever they can for the environments that they work in, because so many of them, in fact, themselves are people that enjoy recreationally the environments that they actually work in. So Salmon Tasmania are on the record to say that any efforts to address and support skate needs to be a team effort. And as fish farmers, they're ready to get to work with the government on a conservation action plan. I know Hydro Tasmania are also on the record saying that they will consider any evidence-based proposals in regards to their water flows. A recent article published some comments from experts from the University of Tasmania. And although there have been suggestions that there is a clear-cut case for a single course of action to support the skate, first and foremost, it must be understood that this is a complex issue, and that complexity has to inform what happens next. Scientists behind a report...
Dr. Woodruff.
Scientists...
Thank you.
That's not correct, and it's the reason why I'm actually standing to speak about this output today, because the more broadcast time is given to extreme points of view, then that needs to be balanced out. It needs to be balanced out by a balanced opinion. The scientists in the report acknowledge that one of a number of elements make a complex web to contributions to what happens in that harbour since European settlement. There's no doubt that whether it be mining, forestry, hydro or aquaculture, they all in their each way make a contribution. However, scientists from the University of Tasmania warn that there is a danger in focusing on just one reason that there is an impact on skate. And there are, for instance, been changes in the waters at the bottom of the harbour. They've warmed significantly due to climate change, and that has a knock-on effect, quoting from this article, on the oxygenation or the oxygen available in the harbour. Yeah. There are other pressures as well, and we know that there's a different conversation going on at the moment about recreational fishing and gill netting and a commitment or a strategy around gill netting. But again, gill netting has been seen to have an impact. The heavy metal pollutions from mines. Now, all these things are part of our community, they're part of our existence now, and so a response needs to consider all of those in an integrated way. You can't untangle, the article goes on to say, these modern conditions in that harbour, but just by focusing on one element, there is a danger of not actually being able to address the issue. And it's really interesting to say that since we know that the load of salmon in the harbour has been reduced, that even though the biomass has almost halved in the harbour, Dr Ross says that there has only been slight improvements in dissolved oxygen levels, and so therefore removing aquaculture as a single action may not change what is required to support the skate. And so scientists are saying that they are unclear if they're guaranteed to see a positive response by changing aquaculture in the harbour. A focus needs to be on everything, not just one thing. If we don't fix all parts of the problem, there's no point in addressing any single element. And as I said, just reinforcing that Salmon Tasmania, Hydro Tasmania and others are on the record saying that in the environments that they operate, they care about the environments that they operate, they're willing to be part of that solution. Now, Minister, one of the other things that I wanted to raise around an exchange that's occurred through the estimates is more focused perhaps on the government, and I know the interplay between primary industries and your portfolio under environment in terms of aquaculture and the flow-through hatcheries. And I know that there's been a recommendation in the salmon plan to phase out flow-through hatcheries, and I think through the exchanges there's been a concern expressed that a broad brush approach to this, as opposed to focusing on single operations and the impacts that a single operation may have, rather than making a decision across all. I had the opportunity recently to visit 2 of the flow-through hatcheries in northern Tasmania in my electorate of Bass, one in Bridport and one in Springfield South, and there was no doubt on the day that I was there, but also on reporting that's occurred, the indication of the quality of the fresh water there is done by the invertebrates in the water, and I just happened across Todd Walsh the day that I was there. I don't know if you know Todd, the giant freshwater crayfish, and he was doing the invertebrate testing to test the quality of the fresh water coming out of the flow-through hatchery, and had not experienced any concerns, particularly at those 2 sites that I visited. I haven't visited other sites. And so there's a concern across industry that when you make a broad brush decision about a certain type of technology or facility, that you're actually having a detrimental impact about some facilities that are perfectly okay. And so, for instance, in my electorate, we know that with aquaculture, a massive employer in Tasmania, there are great jobs, clever jobs for people who work in those local communities that will be impacted by that decision. And so the industry is calling on the government to say, if you make a decision site by site to say, are these facilities continuing to be okay for that community here? If there are some facilities that need to make some amendments, then that is perfectly acceptable. But by saying that they all need to be phased out does directly impact jobs in rural and regional Tasmania, and jobs that are clever jobs, jobs that young people in the community look up to and aspire to be part of, and then they can find their pathway through to an industry that can create, some of the most celebrated and applauded scientific leaders in the world because of the things that we do here as part of that sector. So I'm concerned about the simplistic nature of conversations happening around the Meagean Scape, particularly around Macquarie Harbour, but I'm equally concerned about the broad brush decisions that this government are making to impact jobs in rural and regional Tasmania by making a blanket decision about flow-through hatcheries in Tasmania.
Oh, the question is that the proposed expenditures be agreed to and the resolutions or expressions of opinion agreed to by the committee in relation to those expenditures be noted. Those of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
That are